You asked about keeping brands relevant. I think we've lost the ability as brand marketers and as companies to really hear what customers are saying. I'm not saying listening, right? I'm not saying about like, well, we've looked at the product reviews and, we've looked at, what our BPO, our business process outsourcer, who's actually answering the phone calls on behalf of consumer affairs. We've listened to some of those calls. Everything is okay. Like we're doing well. Like we're addressing the issues. We're issuing coupons. We're taking in, product concerns. And then I ask, okay, are you doing that at scale? The answer is typically no. We listen to 2% of our calls, 5% of our calls. Or I'll ask, how are you using the language that your consumers are using in order to then talk back to them? And the answer is, well, how are we supposed to do that? And I think the answer really is with generative AI and with large language models. And I'm not saying Google models alone. I'm saying just try with any model, right? So, for example, I'll be speaking at a conference in April. And one of the demonstrations that I want to give in order to kind of get people thinking about brand voice is about, figuring out a way to get closer to the consumer voice in brand voice messages and brand associations. So, for example, I am a SodaStream customer, which is a company owned by PepsiCo now. I make my own soda, my own sparkling water at home. And there's reasons why I do that. And there's reasons why I say I do it. And there's other reasons that I don't necessarily understand why I do it. But the reason why I say I do it is because I don't want to have to go to the grocery store and I'm trying to save the planet. And the reasons why I don't know why I'm doing it, I can't tell you because I don't know. However, you can definitely infer from language that people use, right? There's a fantastic book called Mind State for Marketing by Will Leach, which actually helps you classify with language very specific states that a customer or a consumer is speaking to you and how you could use that information to then talk back to them in a safe way. Some people, in the behavioral science community call it regulatory fit. I believe Will's book makes it much more accessible for people. So if you're trying to learn how to speak to your customers and what your brand voice should sound like, it should be able to relate to how your customers are relating to you in the language that they use. So there's a very, very large opportunity for retailers, CPGs, banks, whoever it is, who has the ability to structure that conversational data. When I say conversational data, I'm talking about call recordings, chats, reviews, both digital and voice, where they can look at the language that consumers are using, okay, and have them understand, are we connecting with these consumers with our advertising, with our brand voice, with our campaigns in general, both in organic and paid media as examples. How can we learn at scale, instead of listening to 2% of those calls, how can I listen to 100%? And this is what this technology is allowing us to do. Here's the irony of it all. When we actually present some of this information to customers, so we have some technology in our conversational AI portfolio, in our customer engagement suite, as we call it, that puts this information in front of executives. And they're very long, difficult conversations. They're almost like therapy in a way, because you're telling them things that they don't think are actually happening in the stores or in the contact centers. And then they ask, well, this has to be a one-off, right? And then the large language models and other bolted-on AI technologies will say, actually, 2% of your calls in 10 million are actually relating to this particular issue. And they're like, we had no idea. And then they ask the question, how come we not, like, how come our people aren't telling us these things, right? And so there's a whole, I would say, litany of behavioral reasons why people don't report these particular issues. But now we can use technology in order to kind of give you the truth of what's happening, so that you can actually action on it, right? And when you're actioning on these particular issues, and I'll give you some examples here in a minute, you can then replay the conversation to a consumer in a marketing campaign, in a sales campaign, or frankly, just in how consumer affairs or customer service representatives are speaking to customers in a way that can diffuse situations, in a way that can make them feel like they're being heard, in a way that they feel like their feedback is being taken and that will be, incorporated appropriately into product, procedure, or what have you, whatever they're calling about as an example, right? I can tell you, having listened personally to a lot of these calls coming into CPG companies, the product feedback coming into consumer affairs lines is incredibly high. Like, it's really, really incredibly high. And I didn't believe it, right? I had to actually do some of my own call recordings and call some of these consumer affairs teams. And, I had a bag of dog food that had like, was it peel moths in it or something like that? And I said, if I call these people, they're not going to issue me a coupon. And they did. And they were very thoughtful about how they handled the interaction. But I can guarantee that conversation is not going to be used for anything else, when in reality it can be used for a lot. It can be used to identify supply chain issues, right? How many of these bags, right, have this problem? Are we seeing a supplier problem coming in here? Can I use that information to then predict or correlate an event, right, and connect these reported issues from consumers to a company? In another case, I've heard people crying on the telephone, right? Um, really bearing their soul in what they feel is a private conversation that should be important to an organization. If somebody is taking the time to call you, right? And I'm separating voice from digital for a very specific reason, and I'll explain why later if we can get to it. But you have an opportunity in the moment to listen and hear what a customer is saying, and then use technology to help you then readdress those concerns at scale in a very impactful and powerful way using generative technologies. So that's my challenge to the community at large here, is to start becoming much more familiar with how to scale your hearing abilities for your customers and consumers via your contact centers, in order to then use that information to really reach and connect your brands and your products with those said consumers and the lookalikes that are out there, who are likely to be consumers of your brands and products going forward.